Picture a young man so beautiful that he caught the eye of the most powerful emperor in the world, only to find himself transformed against his will into a living replacement for a dead woman, forced to wear feminine clothing and endure a public marriage ceremony that shocked even Romans accustomed to their rulers' excesses. Imagine someone whose life became a tragic performance where every day required pretending to be someone he wasn't, living as a symbol of an emperor's grief and madness rather than as a human being with his own identity and desires. This is the true story of Sporus, the freedman whose beauty became his curse and whose relationship with Nero reveals the darkest aspects of absolute power and the complete dehumanization that could result from imperial obsession. Before we uncover the secrets that made Sporus one of history's most tragic figures, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because his story shows how beauty can become the most dangerous gift when it attracts the wrong attention. Sporus entered the historical record in 64 AD as a young freedman performing in theatrical productions in Rome, where his striking resemblance to Empress Poppaea Sabina and his natural grace as a performer made him a sought-after actor in the city's vibrant entertainment scene. His beauty was of the type that Romans particularly admired, androgynous features that could be read as either masculine or feminine, combined with the cultural sophistication that came from his training in music, poetry, and dramatic performance. The tragic irony of Sporus's situation was that his resemblance to Poppaea Sabina, which would ultimately destroy his life, was initially just a professional asset that helped him succeed as an actor specializing in female roles, a common practice in Roman theater where women were often forbidden from performing. His ability to convincingly portray feminine characters while maintaining his masculine identity made him valuable in an entertainment industry that prized versatility and dramatic skill. Emperor Nero's first encounter with Sporus reportedly occurred during a theatrical performance where the young freedman was playing a female role that reminded the emperor painfully of his recently deceased wife. Poppaea had died in 65 AD, allegedly after Nero kicked her in the stomach during a violent argument while she was pregnant, leaving the emperor consumed with guilt and obsessive grief that manifested in increasingly erratic behavior. The emperor's immediate fascination with Sporus reflected his psychological inability to cope with Poppaea's death and his desperate desire to somehow restore her presence in his life. Rather than seeing Sporus as an individual human being with his own identity and aspirations, Nero viewed him as a living opportunity to resurrect his dead wife and continue their relationship as if death had never interrupted it. The initial approach that Nero made to acquire Sporus's services was conducted through intermediaries who offered the young man what appeared to be a tremendous opportunity for social advancement and financial security. The emperor's representatives presented the arrangement as a chance to join the imperial household in a position of honor and influence, carefully avoiding any mention of the specific role that Nero intended for him to play. Sporus's decision to accept the emperor's invitation reflected both the limited options available to someone of his social status and his inability to understand the full implications of what was being asked of him. As a freedman, he lacked the political connections or legal protections that might have allowed him to refuse imperial attention, while the promise of wealth and status made the offer seem like the kind of opportunity that ambitious young Romans dreamed of receiving. The transformation that Nero demanded began almost immediately after Sporus entered the imperial household, as the emperor made clear that his value lay not in his theatrical talents or personal qualities but in his potential to serve as a substitute for the woman whose death had left Nero psychologically devastated. The young man who had once performed female roles as an artistic choice found himself required to live as a woman to satisfy an emperor's delusions. The legal and social mechanisms that made this transformation possible revealed the complete powerlessness of individuals who found themselves the objects of imperial attention, as Roman law provided no protection for those whose beauty or other qualities made them desirable to rulers who viewed human beings as property to be acquired and modified according to their personal preferences. The systematic erasure of Sporus's masculine identity began with his castration, a procedure that Nero ordered to be performed by the finest physicians in Rome to ensure that his living replacement for Poppaea would maintain the feminine appearance and voice that the emperor found essential for his psychological comfort. This irreversible surgical mutilation was conducted without Sporus's consent and represented the complete subordination of his bodily autonomy to Nero's emotional needs. The physical transformation was only the beginning of a comprehensive program designed to remake Sporus into a convincing replica of the dead empress, involving changes to his clothing, hairstyle, makeup, jewelry, and even his manner of speaking and walking. Imperial servants who had once attended Poppaea were assigned to teach Sporus her habits, preferences, and mannerisms, creating a grotesque form of method acting where the performer was required to live permanently in character. The public marriage ceremony between Nero and Sporus, conducted in 67 AD with all the pomp and legal formality typically reserved for legitimate imperial weddings, represented one of the most shocking spectacles in Roman history. The emperor dressed his castrated freedmen in traditional bridal attire, complete with the flame-colored veil worn by Roman brides, and conducted the ceremony as if he were actually marrying Poppaea's spirit rather than forcing a mutilated young man to participate in his psychological delusion. The reaction of the Roman elite to this public ceremony revealed the depth of their horror at Nero's complete abandonment of traditional values and his transformation of imperial dignity into personal theater. Senators, military commanders, and foreign diplomats who were required to attend the wedding found themselves witnessing what amounted to the formalization of the emperor's mental breakdown, while being forced to treat the proceedings as legitimate and worthy of respect. Tacitus, the great Roman historian, recorded the event with barely concealed disgust, noting that the ceremony included all the traditional elements of a Roman wedding except for the presence of an actual woman. His account emphasizes the surreal quality of watching grown men participate in what they knew to be an elaborate charade designed to satisfy one man's inability to accept reality. The legal implications of the marriage were complex and unprecedented, as Roman law had no framework for recognizing unions between men, particularly when one partner had been surgically altered to resemble a woman. The ceremony was essentially a legal fiction that had no standing in Roman jurisprudence, yet everyone involved was required to pretend that it created genuine matrimonial bonds between the emperor and his feminized freedmen. The honeymoon period that followed the wedding saw Nero treating Sporus exactly as he had treated Poppaea, including violent outbursts when the illusion was interrupted by reminders that his wife was actually a castrated man rather than the woman he was trying to resurrect. These episodes of rage and disappointment revealed the fundamental impossibility of Nero's project and the psychological torture that Sporus endured as he tried to satisfy impossible expectations. The broader impact of this relationship on imperial court culture was devastating, as other members of Nero's household learned that their safety and status depended entirely on their willingness to participate in the emperor's delusions regardless of how grotesque or harmful those fantasies might be to the people forced to fulfill them. Daily existence as Nero's wife required Sporus to maintain a constant performance that denied his own identity while embodying the personality and preferences of a dead woman he had never known, creating a form of psychological torture that was as cruel as any physical punishment the emperor might have devised. Every moment of his life was structured around Nero's need to believe that Poppaea had somehow returned from the dead, leaving no space for Sporus to exist as himself. The elaborate mourning rituals that began each day involved dressing Sporus in clothing that had belonged to Poppaea, applying cosmetics using the same techniques and products that the dead empress had preferred, and arranging his hair in styles that maximized his resemblance to the woman he was supposed to represent. These procedures were conducted by servants who had once attended the real Poppaea and who now found themselves participating in what they understood to be a form of imperial madness. The social interactions that Sporus was required to maintain with other members of the imperial court were particularly surreal, as everyone involved was forced to address him using Poppaea's name and to treat him as if he were actually the deceased empress rather than a mutilated freedman playing a role. This collective pretense created an atmosphere of shared delusion that corrupted everyone who participated in it while providing no genuine comfort to the emperor it was designed to serve. The physical intimacy that Nero demanded from Sporus was complicated by the emperor's simultaneous desire for the relationship to resemble his marriage to Poppaea and his unconscious awareness that his wife was actually a castrated man. These contradictions led to violent mood swings where Nero would alternate between tender affection and explosive rage, creating an atmosphere of constant tension and unpredictability. The psychological isolation that Sporus experienced was profound and destructive, as his transformation had cut him off from any possibility of normal human relationships or genuine emotional connections. He could not form friendships with other members of the imperial household because everyone viewed him as an extension of Nero's personality rather than as an individual, while romantic relationships were impossible due to his castration and his complete identification with a dead woman. The few historical accounts that provide glimpses into Sporus's inner life suggest that he developed sophisticated coping mechanisms that allowed him to survive the psychological pressure of his situation while maintaining some sense of his original identity. These strategies included mental compartmentalization that allowed him to separate his performance as Poppaea from his private sense of self, though the constant demands of the role made such psychological divisions increasingly difficult to maintain. The economic aspects of Sporus's position provided some compensation for his suffering, as Nero lavished expensive gifts, jewelry, and properties on his wife, in amounts that exceeded what most Roman nobles possessed. However, these material benefits came with the understanding that they could be withdrawn at any moment if Sporus failed to maintain the emperor's illusion or if Nero's psychological needs changed. The medical care that Sporus received was designed to maintain his physical resemblance to Poppaea rather than to address the psychological trauma he was experiencing, with court physicians focused on preserving his feminine appearance while ignoring the obvious signs of mental distress that resulted from his impossible situation. The suicide of Emperor Nero in June 68 AD, as Roman legions closed in on his hiding place outside Rome, left Sporus in an impossibly vulnerable position as one of the most visible symbols of the deposed emperor's madness and moral corruption. The young man who had been elevated to imperial status through his forced resemblance to a dead woman suddenly found himself without protection from the political enemies who viewed him as both a reminder of Neronian excess and a potential source of legitimacy for future conspirators. The immediate aftermath of Nero's death saw Sporus attempting to navigate the dangerous transition between imperial regimes while maintaining the feminine identity that had been forced upon him but which now made him a target for ridicule and persecution. His castration and years of living as a woman had left him unable to resume his original masculine identity, while his association with Nero's most controversial policies made him unwelcome in the new political order. Emperor Galba, who briefly succeeded Nero, initially showed some tolerance for the former emperor's household members, but political pressure from senators and military commanders who wanted to demonstrate their complete rejection of Neronian values led to increasingly harsh treatment of anyone associated with the previous regime's excesses. Sporus found himself caught between his need for imperial protection and the new emperor's desire to distance himself from his predecessor's controversial lifestyle. The brief reign of Emperor Otho brought an unexpected reprieve for Sporus when the new ruler, who had once been married to Poppaea Sabina before Nero took her as his own wife, decided to take Sporus as his companion. This development demonstrated how the fundamental problems of the imperial system transcended individual emperors and continued to corrupt those who achieved absolute power, but it also provided Sporus with temporary protection from his enemies. Otho's defeat and suicide after only 3 months in power left Sporus once again without protection and facing an uncertain future under Emperor Vitellius, who proved far less tolerant of Nero's surviving associates. The new emperor's advisors viewed Sporus as a dangerous reminder of imperial corruption and convinced Vitellius that eliminating him would demonstrate the regime's commitment to traditional Roman values. The final tragedy of Sporus's life came when Vitellius ordered him to appear in the arena as a gladiator, forcing him to fight for the entertainment of the same crowds who had once watched him perform as Nero's wife. This ultimate humiliation was designed to demonstrate that the new emperor completely rejected the values and practices that had characterized the previous regime, while providing spectacular entertainment for the Roman masses. Rather than endure this final degradation, Sporus chose to take his own life, ending a story that had begun with natural beauty and theatrical talent but had been twisted into one of history's most tragic examples of how absolute power can destroy everything it touches. His suicide represented not just personal despair but a rejection of a system that had treated him as property to be modified, displayed, and ultimately destroyed for the entertainment of others. The historical legacy of Sporus's story serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of imperial excess and the vulnerability of individuals who find themselves caught in the machinery of absolute power, where personal identity becomes subordinate to the psychological needs and political requirements of rulers who view other human beings as instruments for their own gratification. The next time you encounter stories about the glamour and power of ancient Rome, remember Sporus, a talented young performer whose beauty became his curse and whose life was consumed by an emperor's inability to accept loss. His tragedy reminds us that behind every display of absolute power lies someone whose humanity was sacrificed for another's obsession. If this heartbreaking story of identity stolen and dignity destroyed moved you, smash that like button, subscribe for more forgotten tales of history's forgotten victims, and hit that notification bell, because the most important lessons come from remembering those whose suffering was hidden behind imperial grandeur. What other historical figures do you think paid the ultimate price for their beauty or talent? Share your thoughts in the comments below.